Welcome, friends, to a gathering place for the curious and the brave. Do you ever feel a shiver run down your spine on a perfectly ordinary day? Does the rustle of leaves in the wind sometimes whisper secrets in your ear? We delve into the realm of the unexplained. These are true stories, whispered through generations, passed down from campfire to campfire, each one abrush with the unseen. So settle in, adjust the lights, and prepare to be chilled. Tonight, we share true scary stories.
I went through a very rough breakup with my boyfriend of around 18 months in 2012. You know that old saying, you live by the sword, you die by the sword? Well, our relationship was kind of like that, only instead of a sword, there was a whole lot of drugs and alcohol. He was a real party animal, and at first I found that very attractive. After 2 years of fighting and struggling for money while nursing many hangovers, though, I realized that I wanted to mellow out while he didn't want anything of the sort. I didn't want to be that lame, controlling girlfriend. I wanted him to live the kind of life that felt right, and I just wasn't going to let us slowly drift apart when we'd be much happier pursuing relationship goals with alternative partners. That's the way I saw things anyway. He obviously disagreed. Like I said, the breakup itself was very rough. There was yelling, there was tears. In the end, he seemed to accept my decision and agreed that we'd be happier seeing other people. I also explained that I wanted to end things on a high note and that I didn't want my final memories of him to be tarnished by anything negative. That's what really seemed to make it through to him, and after that, everything seemed fine. Then the night came that he drove over to complete the ceremonial exchanging of stuff. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. If you've been seeing someone long enough to frequently stay over at each other's places, chances are you've left a whole lot of stuff over there. For example, skincare stuff to keep in his bathroom, so I didn't have to carry a makeup bag to and from his place. I'd been texting my ex back and forth for a few days, organizing the exchange and making sure we were not forgetting anything, so it would only be a one-time thing, and we could make as clean a break as possible. He agreed to come over to my place once we'd both finished up work. When I got home, I bagged up all of his stuff and waited for him to arrive. He told me that he'd be at my place by no later than 7. Well, 7 turned into 7:30, and there was no sign of him. I texted him to ask where he was, but got no reply. 5 to 10 minutes later, I started calling him, and after getting his voicemail a few times, he finally picked up. He didn't sound like he was in a particularly good mood. He told me he'd gotten caught up in a few things, and that he'd be over by around 8:15. All I did was ask him not to be too late, as I had work the next morning. He hung up, and I went back to waiting. Finally, just before 9 o'clock, he buzzed my apartment, and I let him upstairs. I waited near the door with his bag of stuff in hand. It took him longer than usual to make his way over, but when he did, I opened it. I could smell the stink of booze on him right away, and that gave me bad vibes immediately. He had a shopping bag that looked like it had my stuff in it, so that was a good sign at least. I had also explicitly asked him to stay sober for the exchange, because I knew what it might lead to. I say I knew what it might lead to, but that's not strictly true. I figured it'd get emotional or something, but I never guessed he'd take things as far as he did. The first thing I said when I opened the door and smelled the booze on him was a reminder of what he'd promised me. He brushed it off and asked to come inside, but I said no. I'd prefer if we left things at the door. He started asking me, "Really, is this who you are now?" I politely reminded him that if he couldn't conduct himself, then he wouldn't be getting his stuff back. It was a huge bluff on my part, but I didn't want to give him the impression that he could just do whatever he wanted even outside of our relationship. I took a step back from the door and was getting ready to close it. I attempted to do so. His response was to shove his foot in the doorway to keep it from closing, and then barge open and break it down. It frightened me. He walked down the hallway of my apartment and into the kitchen. I started yelling at him, saying, "What the fuck do you think you're doing? Get out of here!" He didn't listen. He marched over to my kitchenette area, where there was a small dining table. He slammed a bag of my stuff down on it, and then took a seat. He demanded I come talk to him about the breakup, so he could get some final closure, as he called it. I held firm, though, and refused to allow him to do so. I kept demanding that he leave before I called the police. That really made him lose his mind. He started screaming at the top of his lungs. By the time he started freaking out and screaming, I was already on the cusp of dialing 911. But when he walked over to my knife block and pulled out the biggest one, I realized things were beyond negotiating. I dialed in 911 and ran back toward the front door of my apartment. I had some pepper spray in my jacket that I kept on the hanger, just out of sight, in case I ever needed to use it. I grabbed that. Now I was outside my apartment in the hallway, with the door wide open. While I was talking with the 911 operator, my ex started screaming at me to get off the phone and come back inside. Since he was still carrying that knife and brandishing it toward me, though, there was 0% chance of me heading back inside to talk to him. I gave the operator the address to my apartment building, and my ex started moving toward me out of the kitchen. Obviously, I wanted to keep out of stabbing range. I remember I ran out of the hallway toward the elevator and the stairs, stopping to check if he was following me. Initially he was, but when I turned around in that split second that he saw me and the fear on my face, he stopped walking. He turned the knife and started to stab himself in the stomach. Every time he stabbed, blood came out. It looked like lots of quick, shallow stabs, but from the horrible sound it was making, I could tell he was really hurting himself. I turned around and ran screaming down the stairwell. He didn't shout anything after me, or if he did, I didn't hear it at all. All I could hear was grunts of pain as he continued to stab himself again and again. I started screaming even louder, and didn't hear anything else after that. I took my phone away from my ear as I ran down the stairs, because I felt like I might lose my balance. I remember running down them, screaming, "He's stabbing himself! Someone call an ambulance!" I ran all the way across the parking lot of my building before bringing my phone back to my ear. I kept talking to the operator as I waited by the street. I knew the cops would come down this one. I remember begging the operator to tell EMTs to hurry up. My ex was hurting himself to the point I thought he was going to die. She did her best to try and keep the calm. Next thing I knew, the cops showed up. I started frantically waving at them to flag them down. One of the other things I remember is how as I let the cops into the building with my key fob, I kept telling them, "Please don't shoot him. He's trying to hurt himself, so please don't kill him." And the cops completely ignored me. I guess they were focused on their job. In the moment, their silence had me in even more of a panic. I thought my ex-boyfriend was going to die right there in the hallway outside my apartment no matter what, either by himself or by the police. The EMTs arrived and carried him to the ambulance, which was at least an hour after everything started. I was convinced he was going to die. Thankfully, my ex actually survived his self-inflicted wounds, although he did need multiple critical surgeries to repair all the damage he'd done to himself. And I thought the whole experience might sober him up, but last I heard he'd gone right back to his old self after maybe a year on the wagon. It's a shame, really. He had lots of potential. I wish he'd made some better choices in life. As I said earlier, though, if he's living the life he wants to live, then I'm happy for him, but I'm also happy to be apart from him. One time, I got back from work a little bit later at night. I lived alone in an apartment on the second floor during this time. After getting back home, I changed and went into the living room. I was sitting on the couch eating something when I suddenly heard this loud noise coming from next door. It sounded like the next door neighbor was banging on the wall. It was extremely loud and went on for almost a minute or so. I was really confused when I heard this. I wasn't making any loud noises or anything. The TV was on, but the volume was really not high at all. The neighbor was pounding on the wall as if I was being super noisy though, and he wanted me to be quiet. I didn't really know why else he would be banging on the wall otherwise. Even if he was bothered by the TV, I didn't even think it was loud enough for my neighbor to be able to hear it. I wasn't hearing any other loud noises from anywhere else. Just to be sure though, I muted the television for a short time. Everything was quiet, but then the loud banging on the wall started again. I really had no idea why my neighbor would be doing this now. I wasn't aware of making them angry or anything, and to be honest, I didn't even know who was my next-door neighbor on that side. I never really saw them, and I'd been living at that place for about 6 months now. I had never met or seen hardly any of my neighbors. The banging stopped after a short time. I didn't really know what to make of this. For the next couple of minutes, everything returned to normal. It was so quiet that I just kind of moved on from that. 5 minutes later, there was suddenly an extremely loud pounding coming from my front door. It sounded as though whoever had been banging on my wall had now moved on to my front door. It continued for about 30 straight seconds. I decided to get up and walked over to the door. When I approached, the banging stopped. I looked out my peephole to the other side, but nobody was there. Whoever had been knocking had already left. I had no idea what was going on now. I was just assuming it was my next-door neighbor, but I didn't even know what they looked like if it was to confirm. I considered going over there and asking what their problem was, but I decided not to. Based on how hard the pounding on the walls and door was, I had a bad feeling about all this. I moved on and tried to ignore it. I was hoping there would be no further incidents on my walls or door or anything else that night. Luckily, there wasn't. The next day, when I was leaving for work, I walked out of my apartment and went down the hallway. There was an elevator and a set of stairs right next to it. Now, I was always in the habit of just taking the stairs, and I very rarely used the elevator. After walking down the hallway, I passed by my next-door neighbor's door. Just a moment after, I heard the door open behind me. This was the very same neighbor who'd seemingly been banging on my walls and door last night. I did remember that, but I just kept walking. When I made it to the stairs, I started to go down. I heard whoever it was walking behind me. As the stairs turned in the stairwell and I went around the corner, I glanced up and saw a man following me. I didn't look directly at him, but apparently this was the guy who lived next door to me. After walking down the stairs, I went through the lobby and left out the front door. The guy that was walking behind me followed me exactly and walked out the door as well. He was following me even out onto the sidewalk. I had parked in the large parking lot that was at the complex. After getting to my vehicle, I got inside and saw the man just standing there staring at me. He was about 50 feet away, and I had no idea what his deal could possibly be. He stood there even as I drove off and went to work. I had never seen that guy before, but he must have been my next-door neighbor. I worked the day as normal, and when I arrived home afterwards, it was a little bit later at night. By the time I arrived back, I think it was about 10 o'clock or so. I went inside my apartment building and started to walk up the stairs. When I made it to the top, I moved down the hallway toward my door. Right as I passed by my next-door neighbor's door, though, I heard it fling open again. I had a bad feeling now. I walked faster to get to my door, but I could hear his footsteps enter the hallway and follow behind me. When I arrived at my front door, I unlocked it and opened it up. As I was closing the door, I heard the footsteps rushing toward me. I slammed and locked it, and 5 seconds later, my neighbor actually tried opening it. There was once again more loud banging coming from the other side. I really couldn't believe this guy. I looked out the peephole and saw him relentlessly attacking my front door. I moved away from it and was about to call the police. As I went and grabbed my phone, he stopped abruptly. At that point, I put my phone down. I didn't want to get in trouble with my next-door neighbor. Clearly, he had some problems with me, and he even tried entering my apartment. I didn't know, though, if maybe it was a misunderstanding or something. I decided that if anything further happened, I was going to go over and give him a piece of my mind. Hopefully, he wouldn't be too dangerous. After that, nothing else happened, though. I would say about a week later, I saw another neighbor in the hallway. I went over and introduced myself to her. I had seen her a couple of times before and knew she lived here for a while. I told her about what happened and asked her if she knew the guy who lived next to me. She told me that nobody lived there in that apartment and it had been vacant for quite a while. It was crazy to hear. I went to the offices of the apartment complex and asked one of the agents. They confirmed that the unit next to mine was vacant and had been for several weeks. My mind was blown after hearing that. I never did see that guy again or hear anything else about him. I don't live there anymore, but I still get the creeps thinking back to those days. I grew up during the 1980s in a very tight-knit community in Georgia. When I was a kid, I used to love camping in my backyard almost every Friday night. Me and my little brother Donnie would set up a tent back there and spend the night playing with our G.I. Joes inside. Our neighborhood was nice, but the surrounding area was a bit shady. You see, this was at the height of the cocaine epidemic, and within a few years our small town became infested by addicts and drug dealers. I remember there was an old man named Mr. Carl who was once a pilot in World War II. He used to live across the street from us. His wife had died of cancer around 1984, and after that he really went off the deep end. 3 years after his wife's death, he became addicted to crack and began wandering the streets at night. It wasn't long after that when his house got repossessed by the bank, and Mr. Carl became homeless. Donnie and I would see him almost every morning, sleeping on a bench at our bus stop. Sometimes he would be awake and talk to us. We knew Mr. Carl, so we weren't afraid of him, and he never did anything to us. He was always extremely friendly. After a while, Donnie and I noticed that Mr. Carl was no longer around. We asked our parents if they knew anything about what might have happened to him, but they didn't have a clue. I can't recall how much time went by since the disappearance of Mr. Carl. I would say it was at least a month or so. One Friday night, me and my brother were in our backyard, playing with these rubber band rifles our dad had made for us. It was a piece of wood, with a wooden clip glued to the top of it, and a nail sticking out of the front so you could stretch the rubber band around it. That way, when you released the clip, the rubber band would go flying. Donnie and I were shooting up plastic toy soldiers when we heard something rustling in the bushes outside. Now, this is Georgia. We've chased away our fair share of raccoons and stray dogs, and with our new makeshift weapons, we were feeling extra brave that night. We decided not to go get our dad, and that we would handle this intruder ourselves. We both exited the tent and made our way to the very back of the yard, where a chain-link fence separated our property from a small forested area. Donnie had brought along the flashlight and was pointing it into the forest just beyond the fence line. When we got there, a figure emerged from behind a tree suddenly. I recognized the jacket the person was wearing. It was a dark brown bomber-style jacket, and I saw the person was also wearing one of those army veteran caps. There's only one person I knew who wore clothes like that, Mr. Carl. When I got a better look at this guy in the woods, though, it didn't look like Mr. Carl at all. He was definitely wearing his clothing, but the man appeared to be way too young to be him. I didn't get a good look at the man's face, as he was looking down, so the bill of his cap concealed his features. And that's when I noticed dark red stains all over the man's jacket and jeans. Me and Donnie stared at the man for 30 seconds before asking him what he was doing. The man reached down and grabbed a large axe that had been laying at his feet. He then began moving toward the fence. Me and my brother dropped our wooden guns and took off back toward the house. As soon as I turned around, I felt something fly past my head. I looked over to see the axe flipping through the air. It crashed into the tent, causing it to collapse. The rest of that night is a blur to me. According to our dad, when me and Donnie burst into the house, we were absolutely hysterical. It took an hour to get the full story out of us, and by that time, the mysterious man in Mr. Carl's jacket was already gone. I just remember my parents talking to a police officer in the living room. As far as I'm aware, there was never any follow-up, and I don't know if the guy was ever caught or retrieved the axe he threw at me. This incident effectively put an end to our Friday night camping, and we never did figure out what exactly happened to Mr. Carl. When I was 16, my family went on a vacation to Cancun with a big chunk of our extended family. It was an all-inclusive package, so we never left that hotel. Our days consisted of eating, sleeping, and going to the beach right by the property. My family didn't even want to spend a single penny more to, explore the beautiful city. You must know that sleeping after a day at the beach or a pool, it's a little bit harder. You're in bed and you feel like you're still in the water, but you're more tired than ever, so you sleep like the dead. Some days I didn't even notice how tired I was until I woke up the next morning. My parents would wake me so we didn't miss the hotel breakfast, which closed at 9 a.m. One night was very strange, though. We stayed up much later than usual, and I was nodding off. I had stayed with my aunt and some of my cousins, talking about the stars and the darkening beach and how pretty everything was. I asked my aunt if we could try to take a bus and see more of the city. Cancun is a touristy place, so it really wouldn't be that dangerous. My aunt and her husband were wishy-washy, though. Honestly, years later, I get it. Going on a vacation with your whole family is really expensive, so an all-inclusive is the best way to do it. If we went out, we would undoubtedly want to spend money or eat somewhere, and that just wasn't in the budget. They told me they might want to go somewhere, though, on the last day. I honestly don't remember much of the rest of the night. I was really sleepy. I went with them back to our rooms. My aunt and her family had been given rooms on the floor right below us. I don't know what exactly happened, but the next thing I knew, I was waking up, thinking that I was in my aunt's room. I got up from bed and went out, took the elevator and knocked on our room door. I was calling out to them, yelling my sister's name and banging on the door. It was around 4 a.m. or so. The door swung open and I stumbled slightly inside. 2 big hands grabbed me, and I thought it was my dad. I told them I'd slept in my aunt's room and that I was sorry I hadn't returned, but as I began to wake up and get more focused, an instant chill ran through me. Instead of my dad, it was a fully naked man with the hairiest chest I had ever seen. I'm focusing on the hair right now because I don't really want to talk about everything else. It was the first time I'd ever seen all of that. The man was angry and looked like he had just woken up. All I could think was, what had he done to my parents, and why was he naked in our room? Why was he still holding on to me? I asked the man what he was doing. He looked at me strangely and stepped closer. I struggled and squirmed. I managed to get out of his grip and ran to the lobby. There wasn't anyone around to help me. I thought about yelling for someone, anyone, but I was extremely confused. I sat down and tried to breathe. I don't know how, but apparently I passed out. I woke up after my sister was slapping my head. She started to berate me, asking how I could just sleep there. I tried explaining myself, and she told me that I was never in my aunt's room. I had gone to our room apparently, just like always. I spent the rest of our vacation thinking about what happened. My sister told everyone, and they all laughed at my expense. My aunt confirmed that they had gotten in the elevator before me, so they assumed that I had just gone to my room. After teasing me for a bit, they all concluded it must have just been some sleepwalking episode. I never told her or anyone about the naked man that tried to drag me into his room, but I thought about him a lot. Anything could have happened to me. Waking up a random naked man as a 16-year-old girl in the middle of the night on vacation and stumbling into his arms. I'm just so glad I managed to get away. Nothing similar ever happened to me again. I didn't have a sleepwalking disorder, thank God. Whenever I go to hotels or other vacations, I always do a little ritual of checking the door number before falling asleep now. My husband says it's OCD, but I say it's just being careful. One bizarre thing that happened when I was a kid was a sleepover experience I had. It was back when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I remember that I lived with my parents and older brother in the suburbs. A new family moved into the house across the street and one over to the right. They had a kid who was my age, and I remember meeting him when they first arrived. His name was Jake. There were a few kids in the neighborhood I would hang out with here and there. Over the first week or two that Jake lived there, I sort of hung out with him as well, maybe 2 or 3 times or so. My impression of him was that he was kind of weird. He was also really rude and didn't seem to like the same things the other neighborhood kids and I did. There were a few games we would always play, and I remember that when we invited him, he would always say they were dumb and mock us. I don't really remember much else. I just know I didn't have the best impression of him. One day, my mom suddenly told me that Jake was going to have a sleepover with me. I remember being really confused, thinking, when did I agree to that? I told my mom I thought he was kind of weird, but she said he was probably just shy and insecure about moving to a new town. Apparently, Jake's mom had asked mine if he could stay over because she wanted him to make some new friends. I'm not sure if he had a hard time making friends or what, but I reluctantly agreed. Jake walked over with his mom, and our moms talked for a little while. Jake's mom seemed pretty nice, but Jake really wasn't. We went upstairs to my bedroom, and I figured we could just play video games or something for a while. Jake talked to me, and I don't really remember much of the conversation. We started gaming, and I was feeling a little bit better about him. He was decent at whatever games we played. We didn't really have to talk much either. We could just go from one game to the next, and it's always nice to have somebody to game with. This was before online gaming was super popular, so multiplayer often meant actually having to have another person there in the room with you. At whatever time I usually went to bed, we stopped gaming. Jake had a sleeping bag he had brought with him. I climbed into my bed and the lights went out. The next thing I remember was waking up when it was still pitch black out. I was half awake and didn't know what was going on. After opening my eyes, I noticed Jake standing in my bedroom. He was holding one of those little Nerf footballs I had. He then walked over to my bedroom window and opened it up. I was just laying there squinting my eyes from having just woken up. I didn't say anything or even move. After opening my bedroom window, Jake tossed the ball out of it. He then walked over and grabbed another ball and tossed that out the window as well. I really didn't know why he was doing this. I watched him. I was so confused. Jake walked over and picked up my PlayStation, unhooking the controllers and other wires. I realized he was probably going to toss that out the window as well. As he was walking over, I finally spoke up. I asked him what on earth he was doing. He looked over at me surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to be awake. He dropped my PlayStation on the ground right there and ran out of my bedroom. I was shocked. I got up and walked out of the room and heard the front door of our house opening. He had left the house entirely. I walked down and left the house to see where Jake had gone. When I got to the front yard, I saw Jake sprinting into his own and entering his house. I was really weirded out by all this. I went and grabbed everything he had thrown out the window, then went back inside. I went back to bed. The next morning, I told my parents about it, who seemed to be just as confused as I was. We thought that maybe he was sleepwalking or something, but his parents never said anything about it, before or after. For about 2 weeks, I didn't see Jake at all. I don't recall seeing his parents outside either. The next time I saw him was almost just as strange. One night, I was sitting in my bedroom playing video games, like I often did. It was warm, so I went to open my window and get a cool breeze flowing. My window faced out at the front yard, and as soon as I looked outside, I saw somebody was standing there. I looked closer and realized it was Jake. He was just standing there at the end of the front yard by the street, right next to the pine tree. He appeared to just be staring right at me. I kept looking at him for 10 seconds when he turned around and walked away. I didn't know what this kid's problem with me was. I checked out my window several more times that night, but didn't see him again. These events all took place during the summertime. I was expecting that once the school year came around, I would be seeing him in my class, but his family ended up moving toward the end of summer. I never did see him again after that. I still wonder why he acted that way and did those strange things as well. This happened about 6 years ago, and I'll never forget it. I woke up at about 3 a.m. or so, needing to use the bathroom. I was a high school student back then and was living with my parents. In our house, we only had one bathroom, and it was downstairs. As I went downstairs, my eyes were drawn to the front door, and I noticed that just by the position of the door handle, the front door appeared to be unlocked. This actually happened quite a lot when I was in high school. I had the worst habit of leaving the front door unlocked. When my parents came home from work, they would just stay home, but I liked to go out. I didn't ever stay out too late, though. Usually, I'd be home by 10 o'clock. One of my closest friends lived on the same street as us, and we went to each other's homes very regularly. I figured I must have forgotten to lock the door when I came home that night. The first thing I did when I went downstairs was lock the door again. I didn't want to be in trouble in the morning. Next, I went and used the bathroom. Just as I was heading back upstairs, I heard a terrifying sound. The door handle began to rattle. Someone was trying the door. In a house in absolute silence, the sound of someone violently trying the door handle was very jarring. It jumped me out of my skin. Not really knowing what to do, I turned to face it. I guess I wondered at the time if there was someone from my family behind that door. Maybe a family member who had just stepped out, and now I'd locked the door and they couldn't get back in. Maybe someone had realized that we were out of something we would really need in the morning time. Possibly went to the convenience store. These thoughts all seemed plausible to me at the time. I thought that maybe I should just unlock the door before whichever family member was out there got angry at me. I turned to head back to the door, but for some reason I hesitated on picking up the key from the bowl on the table. Something just didn't feel right. It was 3 a.m. I was sure that no one would be out that late. I decided to go upstairs quickly and see if anyone wasn't accounted for. I slowly creaked open my parents' bedroom door and took a peek inside. I expected to see one half of the bed vacant, but it wasn't. Both of my parents were right there sleeping soundly in their bed. That left me with an unanswerable question. Who was trying our front door? I stood at the top of the stairs thinking about this for a while. I began to creep downstairs one step at a time. A part of me was thinking there must have been some sort of emergency. This kind of thing just didn't really happen in my town. No one came to your house in the night. I thought I should try to figure out who was out there. I got a good halfway down the stairs and froze when the door handle started rattling like crazy. The person who had a hold of it on the other side was really forcing their weight down upon it. They were pressing against it with their body, and as they tried to open it, the door is making this horrible metal clunking sound. It was shaking the entire frame. I stood there almost whimpering, trying not to attract attention. The door rattled like crazy for 30 seconds. I heard a heavy thud against the bottom of it. It seemed as if someone had tried one final attempt to kick the door in. After that final kick, the house went back into silence, and whoever was out there seemed as if they had left. The following morning, all the neighbors were out in the street talking. I was waiting to leave for school. It turned out a number of cars in the neighborhood had flat tires. Someone had been out there last night slashing all of them. I was so shaken by the whole series of events that it took me 2 years after it all happened to be comfortable with walking home alone again. I know it might not sound like all that much happened, but it was very traumatic for me. Even now, I torture myself trying to figure out why that person came to our house that night and what might have happened if I didn't need to use the bathroom at 3 a.m. If I'd stayed asleep for a few minutes longer, then whoever was trying the door would have easily gotten in. If they were slashing everyone's tires, that means they'd come with a weapon. I often wonder about what the purpose of their visit might have been. Why did they pick our house that night? Not knowing is almost as scary as that night itself was. I remember my parents saying the police never made an arrest. It scares me to know that whoever did all this is still out there. This happened when I was in kindergarten. We all used to sleep in the same room when I was young. On the night that this took place, I was sleeping in between my father and younger brother. For some reason, I suddenly woke up. That wasn't like me at all. Even at that age, I would usually sleep through the night like a dead man. My eyes had just opened, and I was awake. I think I've always been sensitive to sounds, so that might have been what woke me up. It was a noise of some kind. We had a nightlight, so I could see most of the room. I didn't see anything I thought might have awoken me. I should have just gone back to sleep, but for some reason I didn't. I was worried about my nightlight. It wasn't just a nightlight. It was also a baby monitor. Despite the fact that my younger brother wasn't a baby and I was in kindergarten, my dad still kept the baby monitor plugged in at all times. When my dad was at work, it acted as a kind of live video feed, so he could keep an eye on my brother and I. Usually, the baby monitor never bothered me. I was glad it was there. That night, though, I felt like something was wrong. I laid there in the quiet of the night, just cautiously listening and watching, and then I heard a noise. It sounded like a radio. The sound was very low. I had to strain my ears to even hear it. It was very weird. I remembered there was a high school student who lived above our apartment, and she often listened to the radio. My dad always got annoyed when she played it too loud at night, so I figured this was just one of those times. I turned onto my side and tried to get back to sleep. Then, instead of a radio, I heard a piano playing. The sound of the piano was much louder than the sound of the radio. I knew the high school girl's family also had a piano as well, so I thought maybe she had started to play it. Weird, why would she play it in the middle of the night while also listening to the radio? Eventually, I couldn't take any more. If she kept on playing it, I thought I'd never get back to sleep. I shook my dad by his shoulder and woke him up. I said, "Dad, the piano is too loud." He woke up and after a while said he couldn't hear anything and not to worry about it. He didn't really seem to care. I reluctantly went back to trying to get back to sleep, but it seemed like the sound of the piano was getting louder. I tried to wake my dad again, but he ignored me. I was looking at my brother, and he was soundly asleep. I couldn't believe it. Just as I was starting to feel uncomfortable and a little frightened, the sound stopped. I closed my eyes, finally feeling at peace, and then I froze. Some strange-sounding music started, and it played a voice singing "Tomorrow" over and over again. It was a man's voice, singing in a jaunty nursery rhyme sort of way. It was again at a really low volume. It was at this point that I realized that these sounds could have been coming from the two-way intercom function of the baby monitor. I laid there as still as possible, trying to figure out what on earth was going on. I couldn't help but go back to straining my ears to listen to the voice and music. I began to be able to make out a few more words than just the "tomorrow." The singing man was singing this: "Tomorrow you'll die, you'll die, you'll definitely die." When I understood the words this strange voice was singing, I instantly covered my ears. My body began to shake. It was so scary. I didn't know who this person was, or why they were saying I was going to die tomorrow. If that sounds like my reaction was a little much, please remember that I was only in kindergarten when this happened. Before I knew what to do next, I found myself crying. I think at that point my father noticed or woke up. I had worked myself up so much that my father was certain I was having a fever dream. That made me panic even more, because I was thinking about that song I'd just heard from the baby monitor. I remember being so worked up that I couldn't even understand what my dad was saying. I could only think about how hot I was getting and what was going to happen in the morning. The start of potentially my last day on Earth with my family and my friends. That's about as much as I can remember. I know I couldn't sleep until the morning light rose behind the curtains. As you might have figured out by now, I did not die the next morning, nor the next day. Years and years had passed since I heard that creepy voice singing through the baby monitor. I was fine. My fever went away. I'm fairly certain it was a reaction to the panic and stress I was under at the time. Apparently, I told my dad about the song I'd heard, and he said I was so worked up I was repeatedly telling him I was going to die. He was obviously scared as well, because little kids of that age don't usually just say things like that. I don't really have an explanation for what happened. I know there are stories out there of people's baby monitors being tapped into by strangers, speaking to children through the device. It kinda makes me sick that there was an individual out there that wanted to terrify me that much for their own sick entertainment. I pleaded with my dad to get rid of the baby monitor, but he didn't want to. I mean, I do get it. It's a nice way for him to keep an eye on us. But on the other hand, I knew that someone else had their eyes on us too. I got in a lot of trouble for unplugging that baby monitor, when he had expressly told me not to do it. It was on several occasions. Nothing like that singing voice ever happened again, thankfully. But that was pretty much the scariest thing that ever happened to me as a child. I spent the entire following day worried about if I would even live on to see another. That's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. I guess the only real takeaway from my situation is to ask parents to believe their kids, because sometimes what they think is just a bad dream or overactive imagination is actually something much more disturbing. This is something that happened back in 2003. For some background details, I'm a woman, and I was around 12 years old at the time this happened. I had a group of friends that I went to school with, and we would hang out together all the time. One time, I remember I was at my friend Jen's house with a couple of my other friends there as well. There were maybe 4 or 5 of us in total. We were all going to be staying over for the night at Jen's. I remember her parents' house was really nice, and they had this big living room. That's where we were all going to sleep. We all had our sleeping bags on us, other than whoever would be sleeping on the couch, of course. I remember we were hanging out, and as it got later, we were just watching TV and movies. Everyone else had gone to bed besides us by around 11 o'clock. Now, I remember that a little while after that, another friend, Alyssa, that was with us, went to the kitchen. The kitchen was next to the dining room, which was directly next to the living room. Just as suddenly as she'd gone, though, she came back really fast and said she'd seen a man in the window in the kitchen. At first, we thought she had to be joking with us. I mean, that just sounds so unlikely, right? But Alyssa insisted she was not joking. I thought that either she must be serious or she was a really good actor. She was telling us she'd seen a guy lurking past the window and then looking in at her. One of the lights in the kitchen was on, but it was dim outside. It was dark, so it was difficult to see any details about the man. After a small discussion in the living room, basically all of us went into the kitchen and looked out. Obviously, now there was no one there. We gathered back in the living room together and tried to decide what to do. We were trying to figure out why somebody would even be in the backyard in the first place. Jen said that she wasn't aware of anything like that happening before. Eventually, we just continued on with what we were doing. I think we all figured that maybe it was just a neighbor cutting through the backyard or something, since a couple of hours had gone by since then, and nothing had really happened. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, we were starting to get tired and going to go to sleep soon. I remembered that I was really thirsty, so I went into the kitchen to get some water. When I walked in, though, I noticed that through the back window, there really was a guy right there. I couldn't believe it. He at first appeared to be looking in and was about a foot or two away. I really couldn't tell any details about what he looked like or anything. I immediately ran back into the living room and told everyone at once. Everyone got up and started running through the dining room to the kitchen. But again, when we got there, the man was gone. We looked out the windows of the dining room, the kitchen, and even the living room, but we found no trace of the man. We stayed up for at least another hour, talking about this. Finally, we convinced ourselves that this man must truly be gone for good this time. Everyone went to bed, including myself. We all woke up the next morning, and Jen's parents were making breakfast in the kitchen. I remember that we went in there to get something to eat. A few of us were sitting around talking and eating, and Jen's dad went outside to the patio. I'm not sure where he was going, but when he came back inside, he said that he'd found a bunch of marks at the back door, as if somebody had been trying to get inside. For the next few minutes after that, we discussed everything about the man we had seen. It seems as though he'd tried to break in, but luckily he wasn't able to manage it. I went to a summer camp where everyone slept in these huge tents. Around 10 children would fit into a single one. We had beds, but we wrapped ourselves in sleeping bags on top of the mattresses as well. There was only one building on the entire grounds, and it served as a counselor headquarters, recreation area, and dining hall. The toilets were outhouses, although they were much cleaner than the porta potties I've had to use at concerts and such. I remember one night, I woke up because I really had to use the restroom. It was pretty dark and scary out, so I hurried out and did my business. I was on my way back when I stopped in surprise. I saw a man holding a torch, not like a flashlight, mind you, a literal torch from the movies with fire and everything. I saw him open the flat of one of the boys' tents and put that torch inside. I thought that he must have been the security guard at the campsite, and I didn't want to get in trouble, I briskly walked away. My feet stepped on a branch and made a large snapping sound. Instantly, the man snapped to look at me. It would almost be comical if it wasn't terrifying. He looked surprised, spooked, and angry. I walked to my tent as fast as I could. Through the fabric, I could see him moving away. I hoped that he wouldn't come rat me out for being outside so late. I was an anxious kid, and I worried all night about getting punished and being excluded from activities just because I had to use the bathroom. I even rehearsed everything I would say to the counselors if they called to scold me, and since I couldn't sleep at all because of my anxiety, I saw the light from his torch going back and forth throughout the entire campsite. That only made sleeping much more difficult, because I expected him to circle back around and check our tent. When the sun started to rise, my eyes shut for just a little while. We were all woken up for the day, and by lunch I couldn't even hold my head up at all. At that point, 2 female counselors approached me and asked me what was wrong. They took me to the side and asked if I needed to see the nurse. At the moment, I blurted out that I had gone out last night to pee and had seen the camp security guard with his torch. I was worried I would get in trouble with everyone here because he'd seen me. I also told them I'd seen the guard doing their rounds all over the site, and I hoped he didn't check on the girls' tent going forward, because he would wake me up easily. It was hard for me to fall asleep again. I said all of this very quickly. I was hoping they'd listen to me, because I really didn't want to repeat myself. I looked back at them and saw this weird look of confusion and horror on their faces. One of them asked, "What security guard are you talking about?" I told them it was a man who had a real fiery torch and was looking through all the boys' tents. They looked mortified and told me to go back to my lunch while they ran off somewhere. I went to the table and talked to the others about the mysterious security guard. Only one other kid had seen a light late at night. He was glad it was just the guard, because he thought it was something very scary. After lunch, though, the director of the camp made an announcement. We would all pack up our things because our parents were coming to pick us up. We were all so disappointed. Why had that happened? All we could do was speculate. A girl in our tent said it must have been bad weather coming or something, so it was better to just go home. We still had many days left though, so I was pretty sad. The car started arriving and it was a bit disastrous. My mom hugged me tight and didn't let me go for a while. Nothing else was said, and I never went to camp again. Years later, I ran into a girl from that tent. Her name was Cherry, and she was older than most of us. I was shy and didn't talk to her much that summer, but she remembered me, and we reminisced a little about that summer camp. I wished I had gone to the others, but Cherry said there was no way our parents would ever allow that after what happened. I asked her what she meant, because as far as I was concerned, we really had been sent home because of bad weather. I'd never questioned it, but she was a bit older than me, so she knew the truth. The counselors had discovered that a man who had recently been released from prison around that time happened to be living in a shack near that camping spot. No one knew about it until I alerted them about that man lurking outside at night. She went on to add that he was a registered sex offender. So yeah, the camp had to close down. She told me she had begged her parents to go to another camp for years, but they wouldn't allow it. When prodded, they finally came out to her with the truth. And that truth shut her up pretty quick. Shut me up quick too. This happened when I was back in high school. It was a Wednesday night. Usually on Wednesdays, I would have a youth group at my church, and my mom would have date night with her own mom, where they'd go play cards, watch TV together, etc. This would mean we'd both be gone until 9 or 9:30 every Wednesday night. For whatever reason, both of us decided to stay home on this night though. I was downstairs in my mom's room in the basement, watching TV with her. We also had a roommate at this time, and his dog was named Cinnamon. The roommate was out, as he was a bit of a night owl. While he was gone, his dog would always sleep with us. I slept on a fully sized futon frame at this time, so even though it was a tight fit for myself and the big old pit bull, I always took the opportunity to have her sleep with me. She was, and still is, a great dog. It was around 8 or 8:30 or so. Keep in mind we wouldn't usually be home at this time, and I decided to head to bed. The way our house was set up was that you'd go up a set of stairs, hit a landing, then go up another set of stairs, and you'd be looking through the kitchen and living room. You could see the front door from there. Cinnamon and I were walking up the stairs to my room. Right as we hit the landing, Cinnamon barked a loud bark and booked it up the other flight of stairs. I looked up to see her running through the kitchen, and as I did, the front door suddenly burst wide open. It smacked against the wall, and I saw a man dressed in all black, with black gloves on, running out the doorframe. He jumped down our front steps and away on the sidewalk. Cinnamon stood barking at our screen door on our porch. It was a fast, loud, and shocking event. It was winter and pitch black, so I didn't really see much else. It was dark and happened so fast. I ran over and slammed the front door shut, then locked the deadbolt. I took Cinnamon and went to my room and locked my bedroom door. I called my mom and told her what happened from upstairs. She told me to lock the door and stay in my room. That night, I really didn't sleep much. I was keeping an eye out for any noise or footsteps outside my window, and I swore I did hear some things, but ultimately nothing else happened that night. I spent the night snuggled up to Cinnamon, thanking her for protecting me and being a scary pit bull, even though she was always so gentle. I'll never forget that. I'm 21 years old. This happened to me shortly after I turned 18 and graduated high school. My family moved to a new house in Texas. My mother claimed that it was so we could get a fresh start, but I knew the truth. She was ashamed of all the trouble my sister Jocelyn had gotten into in our hometown. Weeks later, we settled into the new house, and Jocelyn disappeared. My mother received a phone call from my sister's parole officer. Apparently, they found her in Atlanta, and to make a long story short, she wasn't thrilled about the move, so she ran away to a friend's house. Unfortunately, I could not fly back to Georgia with my mother, and so I had no choice but to stay in Texas by myself. The next morning, after my mom left, I went for a jog around the new neighborhood to try and familiarize myself with it. When I stopped to catch my breath and change playlists on my phone, I felt a cold feeling creep up my spine. It was the unmistakable sensation that you get when you're being watched. I looked around, but there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary. I knew from this feeling, though, that someone was watching me from somewhere close by. I decided to cut my walk short. As soon as I reached my house, I locked the doors and immediately ran upstairs to take a quick shower. While I was washing up, though, I heard a faint thudding noise from downstairs. I quickly turned off the shower and listened in. Another thud followed. I quickly threw all my clothes on and ran downstairs to check what was going on. I didn't find anything. The front and patio doors were locked up tight, so I was left feeling a little confused as to what that sound was. I was trying my best to keep my composure. I was finally able to relax and breathe a little when my mom called in to check up on me. I didn't want my mom to be too worried about me. She was already stressing out enough because of the situation with my sister. I told her I was fine and that I was going to order some takeout and relax for the rest of the day. Later that night, around 10 p.m. or so, I finished up my dinner while binge-watching How to Get Away with Murder on Netflix. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. I suddenly woke up a couple of hours later. It was around 1 a.m., and the room was absolutely freezing. The thermostat showed 42 degrees, and that's when that dreadful feeling came back. I felt like what I imagine a deer being eyeballed by an apex predator felt like. Danger was close by. My stomach was in knots. Something was out of place. That's when I realized my phone was missing. After a brief search of the area around me, I couldn't find it. Annoyed, I decided to use a website called Text Now on my laptop. It's a free service online that you can use to track your misplaced phone. I typed in my number, and almost immediately the ringtone stopped. I heard a heavy breathing coming from the other end. I barely had enough time to respond when I heard a knocking on the glass of the patio doors. I grabbed an unscrewed bedpost from the closet before checking things out. When I looked out through the doors, my heart basically stopped. Holding my phone was a dark figure in a goat mask. Before I could make out any other details, the masked man easily slid my patio door open. At just about the speed of light, I burst through the front doors and headed for my neighbor's house across the street. I banged and banged on the door until an older woman came to greet me. She called the police after I explained everything to her. The cops arrived 10 minutes later, but after a thorough search of my house, they found no trace of the intruder. After that ordeal, there was no way I was staying in that house alone. I asked the officers if I could accompany them to the station, to which they kindly obliged. While I was at the station, one of the officers informed me they had located my phone somewhere outside the home. There were no fingerprints on it, though. Added to that, the fact that I couldn't give a detailed description of the assailant. It was a dead end. There was at least one unpleasant surprise, though. I unlocked my phone to call my mom, but upon seeing what was in my photo gallery, my blood ran cold. The officer saw I was getting uneasy and asked me what was wrong. I handed him my phone, and in my gallery, there were 15 videos of me sleeping on the couch, all nearly 3 minutes long. The masked man I saw had been inside my house and was watching me the entire time I was sleeping. I felt so violated that I became nauseous. I called my mom and told her everything. Hours later, she and my sister came straight from the airport to come get me. We didn't live in that house much longer after that. For the longest time, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had woken up with that man standing over me. Perhaps I wouldn't even be here to tell you this story. It took me a while, but I finally came to terms with what happened. I would be lying, though, if I told you that that experience doesn't haunt me to this day. This happened a few years ago, and it's taken me a while to feel like talking about it. This might be a slightly longer than usual story, but here I go. About 4 or 5 years ago, my friend and I, who were college students at the time, decided to go to an all-girl college. There was a festival, and we wanted to meet some women in our area, so it seemed like a good idea at the time. We thought it would be a nice place to meet some woman our age, but somehow we seemed to neglect the fact that we weren't all that interesting or handsome, or even that approachable, really. It didn't exactly go to plan. Not all hope was lost, though. I knew that in some of the classrooms at this university, there would be students selling snacks and drinks. That's how they made money for the festival, you see. I thought that I could maybe get some one-on-one time with whoever was selling that stuff. My friend and I walked the halls of their college. We were waving at ladies, and some of them smiled my way. I even exchanged a number with one. It took some convincing, but she did give up her digits in the end. It was a pretty productive day in my mind. My friend and I decided to head out. We were smiling as we were heading toward the entrance, but that smile was short-lived. It looked like there was increased security presence at the gates. We were both kind of shocked. I wondered if maybe one of the girls we had waved at had taken it the wrong way and complained about us. I hope not. We didn't come to upset or offend anyone. There were more teachers and security people than there had been earlier in the morning, and rather than risk getting into any kind of trouble, we decided to slink out of the back of the school. I hoped there might be some kind of unlocked gate we could slip through. Thinking back on it now, it wasn't exactly the best idea at all. Although what we were doing wasn't exactly the most wholesome of things, I doubt we would have been in all that much trouble just for being there. It was a public event, and we didn't harass anyone or anything. All we had to do was walk out the very same gate we'd come in through, but we didn't. We found a gate at the back of the college campus. The only thing was, it was locked. So, being our dumb young college selves, we decided to climb over it. For some reason, I felt for sure we were going to get in big trouble if we got caught. Somehow, we made it out, and it looked like we'd made it out undetected, too. We climbed down from the gate and came out into a residential area. It was a built-up area of suburbs. We knew that if we kept going in the direction we were heading in, we would probably arrive back at the train station we hopped off at earlier. We walked on for a while, making small talk. We spoke about the woman we had minor exchanges with, and the overall impressions of the festival that day. After a while, though, the small talk kind of dried up, not because my friend and I ran out of things to talk about, but because something weird appeared to be going on. I realized that there were no people around, and this place that was usually so dense. So many cars were lining the streets, but not a single person was in sight. I found it incredibly hard to believe that we hadn't seen a single human being as we walked along. It was so strange. Not even a bus, a taxi, a car, or a bike passed us by. It was so quiet. Maybe it was quiet because it was a Sunday. I looked over at my friend, and I felt as if he was thinking the same thoughts as me. It looked like he had noticed how quiet it was as well. There we were, both continuing to walk and pretending nothing was out of the ordinary. We walked for a few minutes, when I was suddenly struck by a sharp feeling of anxiety. I felt as if someone was watching me. I felt it from somewhere behind me. I'm not that great with intuition or anything like that, so I wasn't sure what exactly my gut was trying to tell me. I took a quick look over at my friend, hoping it was just me being paranoid about things. But when I caught his gaze, I realized that he was feeling exactly what I was feeling. We exchanged some nervous glances, and he asked me, "Do you feel like something's behind us?" "Yeah, I don't know, but it feels like someone's following us." "Don't look back." "I don't know, man, maybe we should speed up a little, just in case." We started walking faster, and I noticed a couple of things about the area. The first thing I noticed was the residential area we were walking through appeared to be going on far too long. Our way to the college felt like it took half the time we had been walking now. The other thing was the fact that even though it felt like something was behind us, it was strange that we hadn't seen a single other person at all. The houses all started to look the same. It was very eerie feeling. I looked up at one of the windows in one of the houses we passed by, and I saw something moving. When I saw that something in that window, my first reaction was something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm glad there's at least some people in there." As I focused on what it was that was moving, though, I realized that something was very wrong. There was a pale, bloodied hand waving at us. I looked at the next window, and there was another hand waving. I could see slightly more of the arm this time. I looked across the street, and through the kitchen blinds I saw more pale hands waving at me. It got to a point where every window we passed by appeared to have these strange hands waving with different degrees of excitement. Some waved erratically, and some seemed to wave suggestively. You could almost tell what the owners of those hands might be looking like just by the way they were moving. We walked past a parked car on the other side of the road, and a hand emerged waving from the back seat of the window. It was downright disturbing. I really didn't like this. I spoke sharply under my breath and asked my friend if he was seeing this too. He didn't answer. I looked over at his face, and in that moment, it looked like he was on the verge of tears. Behind him, I could see a flurry of hands waving from the windows. I asked him an important question. "Can you run?" I watched as he nodded slowly. He seemed scared to speak. Those waving hands were so scary, and so was the feeling of whatever was still following us. It was coming closer and closer. I broke out into a jog, or maybe more like a sprint. Whatever it was, I started running, and so did my friend. I don't know how long we were running for, but my friend started to run out of gas a little. I was in the track and field club, and I wasn't a bad runner back then. My friend was, I don't really know a nice way to say this, but let's just say he was more of an indoors type of gentleman. He was clutching at his sides and complaining. I think he physically couldn't go on any further. He was wheezing and sputtering. He yelled on to go on without him, like we were in an action movie or something. I don't know why, but I started running. Normally, I wouldn't allow myself to leave anyone behind, especially under such strange circumstances, but I ran. I regretted that choice. Maybe I should have at least attempted to carry him or something, although I'm not sure how far the both of us would have gotten. I ran, and gradually realized that the more I ran, the less I felt like something was pursuing me. It felt like the presence behind me had disappeared. It was as if I had broken back into the real world. There was nothing behind me. Life seemed to feel a little bit more normal than it had been a few moments ago. I collapsed in a public park out of exhaustion. There were people around, and that made me feel incredibly relieved. They all seemed concerned for me. I heard the splashing of water. I don't know why, but I brought myself to my feet and went in search of that sound. In the middle of the park was a lake, river, or pond. I'm not exactly sure which one, but it was a big body of water. In that body of water, I saw my friend laying down. It was the one I had been with earlier. There was just no way in hell he could be here after I'd left him behind. I really didn't allow that thought to occupy too much of my brain space, though, because I was so pleased to see him. I yelled his name at the top of my lungs and waded into the water to grab him. My friend's face was expressionless, though. As I entered the water, he went for my legs and took them out from under me. I was submerged in the water, and he was wrestling with me. I didn't know what had gotten into him, but it was like he was trying to drown me or something. I kicked him away, and he fell back. He got up with his arms raised outright, poised to choke me. In the end, some bystanders separated us, and we found ourselves in the back of police cars. Eventually, my friend snapped out of it. I don't know exactly what happened to us that day, but I have a strong feeling that something we ate must have been spiked at that all-girls college. If we were unlucky, our night could have ended a lot more differently than just a wrestle in a pond in a park. All those weird things we saw, those feelings of paranoia, it was all so terrifyingly real. I can still see all those waving bloody hands in my mind. I'm pretty sure we both had a bad trip together. I can barely even bring myself to look at the windows and buildings as I pass by them anymore, for fear of relapsing and seeing those hands waving back at me. I have no idea what exactly that hallucination meant, or if it's supposed to mean anything at all, but all I can say is I'm glad my friend and I were all right in the end, whatever trip we were on. This happened just last year. I live alone in a house with 2 floors and 3 bedrooms total. One of the bedrooms I use as a guest room, and the other as my home office. One night I got home from work at around 7 p.m. or so. After arriving back, I went inside and started to cook some food in the kitchen. The kitchen was at the back center of my house. I listened to the radio as I was cooking, and it took me maybe 30 minutes to finish making my meal. When I was done, I decided to go upstairs and change, then go back down to eat. I walked upstairs and was going to my bedroom when I noticed that the door to my guest bedroom was closed. I always left those doors open, and I didn't recall closing it that day. It was really strange to me. I went over, opened up the door, and took a step inside. The lights were off, but before I could reach for the light switch, I saw something. There was a woman standing at the backside of the room looking at me. It was really dark in there, so I didn't get a good look at her at all. After about a second, though, she started to suddenly charge at me. I stepped back and slammed the door closed, then ran back down the hallway. When I made it to the stairs, I heard the woman throw open the bedroom door. I didn't have any time to think and guess why there was a random woman in my home and why she was now chasing after me. After fleeing down the stairs, I wasn't really thinking at all. I don't know why, but I ran to the door next to the stairs, which led to the basement. I went in there and closed the door behind me. I was standing at the top of the stairs. It was completely dark down there. I guess I thought it would be a good hiding place. I heard the woman go down the stairs, but then she seemed to go and head in another direction, instead of coming toward the basement area. I started to feel ever so slightly better. I took out my phone to call the police, and when I did, I lit up the surrounding area of where I was. I was standing at the top of the stairs still, and I saw that there appeared to be a man standing in the basement at the bottom of the stairs with me. He was moving toward me. When I saw this, I opened the door back up and fled from the basement. I just ran for the front door. I didn't know where the woman was now, but thankfully I did not see her. I left the house and ran for my car. Once I got inside, I called the police. Then I drove away from my home. I didn't come back until the cops got there. When the police got there, they went inside and were able to locate both the woman and the man. The crime couple was arrested. I'm not sure how they managed to get inside of my house, as there was no signs of a break-in. I never found out where they entered from. Maybe I'd left a door unlocked or something, but I really don't know. Apparently, they both entered together, though, and for some reason, the woman hid upstairs and the man hid downstairs. I'm not sure if I just surprised them by getting home, or what. I think they were planning on robbing me, but that was by far the scariest moment of my life. I still live in that house, but since then I've taken just about every security measure there is, and hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. Back in September of 2016, I was living just off St. Martin's Lane in London. One Sunday, me and a mate of mine met up at our local pub to watch the football game. We were going to share a few pints together. We watched on, and after full time, my mate got a text from his girlfriend asking if her and a colleague could join us for drinks. About a half an hour later, she turned up with her colleague in tow. And the first thing I thought when I saw that colleague of hers was, wow, she was without a doubt one of the most stunningly beautiful women I had ever laid eyes on. The very second I laid eyes on her, I was absolutely smitten. For the sake of the story, we'll call her Sarah. She was half Lebanese, and right away there was some chemistry between us. Little did I know, but my mate and his girlfriend had conspired to do a little bit of sneaky matchmaking. Sarah had sent a photo of me on my mate's girlfriend's Facebook and asked her if I was single. They were just as pleased as I was when Sarah and I swapped phone numbers and agreed to go out for coffee sometime. Well, one coffee date became two, then three, and then before we knew it, we were going out together every weekend, and we decided to make things official. Things went great at first. Sarah was a very passionate young woman, and I really liked that about her. After a while, though, so much passion started to show its negative sides. For a start, she could never ever be wrong about anything. It was quite cute when she was being playful with it, but when it got more serious, it was not so cute at all. I remember one incident about 2 months into our relationship. There's this TV game show in the UK called The Chase, and it became kind of a tradition to watch and play along together. We'd both finish work at around 4, and then she'd meet me at Leicester Square. Then we'd head back to my flat to have dinner together. Since The Chase is always on at 5 o'clock, we'd play along with it while we were eating. One day, one of the questions was something about a former Beatle performing a song at a concert or something. In the earlier rounds of the show, the D option was always a joke answer, designed to raise a chuckle amongst the studio audience. On this occasion, the joke was that Edwin Starr, the option, was never in the Beatles at all. It was Ringo Starr, obviously. I immediately called out the correct answer, but Sarah, who was into much more contemporary music, decided the answer was John Lennon. I told her she was confusing it with something else. She insisted and started to get mad. When I was proven right, I didn't rub it in her face or anything. I just told her that was the correct answer, in the most non-confrontational way possible. We carried on eating and playing along with the chase, or at least I thought we carried along playing, because by the end of the round, Sarah's silence told me that she didn't fancy playing around anymore. I asked her if everything was all right, and instead of returning even a sarcastic reply, she completely ignored me. I asked if she was taking the piss, and again she just blanked me. I told her if she was going to act like a child, she was free to leave at any time. She grabbed her purse and coat and slammed the door to my flat on the way out. A few hours later, and several ignored phone calls and texts later, she replied to my text telling me how horrible and arrogant I'd been, and how small and stupid I made her feel. I had no intention whatsoever of making her feel that way, and when I told her as much, she broke down in tears and started sobbing and apologizing over and over. She excused it by saying she was just stressed out at work, and that her auntie back in Beirut was sick. It had all gotten the better of her in that moment, and it wouldn't happen again. I forgave her, we kissed and made up, and that was that. Only that wasn't that at all. This sort of thing happened dozens of more times in the future. I won't bore you with the details of each individual argument, or we'd be here forever. I only went over the first one to give you an idea of just how inconsequential something had to be to set her off. Over time, things gradually got worse, until we were falling out over petty things on a weekly basis. I really did like Sarah. I honestly really did. When she was at her best, she was the perfect girlfriend, but at her worst, she would really go crazy. We were together roughly 6 months. When the negatives really started to outweigh the positives, I decided I had to do the right thing for both of us. I needed to end the relationship before things graduated to the next level, i.e. meeting parents or moving in together or things like that. The breakup was very messy, to say the least. My mate's girlfriend, by that point, had apologized profusely for even introducing me to her in the first place, as Sarah was constantly belittling me and insulting me by now. I chose to break up in a public place, but unfortunately that didn't really help the situation. Sarah caused a massive scene and wouldn't talk to me afterwards, and it took a week before she agreed to exchange all the stuff we'd left in each other's flats. When we made the exchange, she didn't make a scene, but she stayed frosty with me. That would be the understatement of the century, actually. She acted like she despised me. I was worried that she might actually hurt me. Thankfully, she was mature enough not to do so in the moment. I was thoroughly relieved that I could finally close what had been a rather grim chapter of my life. Fast forward to July of 2017. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in quite a long time. I deleted her number and we weren't connected on any kind of social media anymore. It was a complete breakup, no contact at all. I'd started seeing someone new. I'd be lying if my experience with Sarah hadn't made me a little bit paranoid that this new lady would also eventually show her true colors. We went on a few dates and were taking things casually. It wasn't until after the third date at a wine bar that we kissed for the first time. I went home feeling rather good about things after a flirty text exchange with my new partner and what should have been a cold shower. I turned in for the night, feeling quite happy and a little bit giddy as well. The next thing I know, my eyes were opening in my dark bedroom with a distinct feeling of dread and a tightening in my chest. I can't really explain how, but I knew someone was in there with me. Perhaps it was the gentle creak of my bedroom door opening, or the subtle feeling of my mattress sinking in as they sat down on the bed by me. Either way, I awoke to the instant feeling of terror. I'm not exactly proud of this, but my first instinct was to roll over and beg whoever this was not to hurt me. I spun over in bed, adrenaline pumping, expecting to see some masked burglar or some knife-wielding lunatic. I didn't see a balaclava-covered face, though, or the eyes of some crazy spree killer. Instead, I saw Sarah. I should expect some of you to think I'd be relieved to see my ex-girlfriend in place of an armed psychopath. In that moment, though, I was absolutely convinced she was there to kill me. I remember Sarah just staring at me with a blank expression as I slid off the opposite side of the bed from her and tried to put some distance between us. Instead of doing anything, Sarah simply said, "I'm sorry," then got up and walked out of my room. She continued out of my flat. I stood there for a few seconds, panting like the devil, wearing nothing but my underwear, and contemplating just how close I'd come to getting murdered. As I said, we no longer had each other's contact details by that point. I asked my mate's girlfriend to pass a message on for me, basically saying that if she ever came near me again, I'd be getting in touch with the police. I would have preferred to keep it between us. I really would have. I didn't want to air out my dirty laundry in public, let alone anyone else's. As I'm sure you'll agree, though, she didn't exactly leave me much of a choice on that front. It turned out my mate's girlfriend and Sarah weren't working together anymore. Sarah saw the message and blocked her, without so much as a word of reply. Obviously, the big question on everyone's lips was how the hell did she even get in that night? I have a theory on that. Towards the end of our relationship, I'd say the final 2 months or so, I gave Sarah the spare key to my flat. The letting agency had given me 2 copies of the key, one to keep as a spare. I ended up giving it to Sarah so she could let herself in when I wasn't around. Sometimes she'd finish work earlier than I did, so instead of having to take the tube all the way back, Sarah just used to let herself into my flat and wait there for me. She did give me the spare key back when we exchanged our things. At the time, the thought didn't cross my mind that she may have made a copy. The thing that truly scares me is that she made a copy of my key and waited so long, then decided she was going to sneak into my flat in the middle of the night. I really think she wanted to hurt me but changed her mind. If she wanted to talk, there were a dozen different ways she could have reached out to me. Most certainly she didn't have to sneak in the middle of the night and creep into my bedroom while I was dead to the world. The only reason you'd want to do that is to catch someone unaware. I moved away from London just before the pandemic, so I'm confident that she and I will never cross paths again. But if we did, let's just say I won't be in a rush to grab coffee with her anytime soon. When I was 21, I lived with my ex-boyfriend in Southern California. It was the first time in my life that I was on my own, and I had the freedom of being out from under the watchful eyes of my parents. That made me a bit reckless. We lived in what was considered to be a safe neighborhood. Nice houses lined the streets. Cal State University was nearby, and we'd rarely heard of violent crimes happening in the area. One late Friday night, in July at approximately 1 a.m., my boyfriend and I got quite bored. We wanted to get out of our hot apartment and decided to walk several blocks away to a lovely park that had an artificial lake where ducks and geese would gather. There were benches around the lake where you could sit and watch the water. The sky was clear, the moon was out. It was a hot summer night in Orange County. The park was surrounded by an expanse of towering trees and thick bushes. My boyfriend was a naturally thin guy with long hair. I was about 5'5" and weighed 100 pounds at the time. We sat down on a bench to watch the rippling water as the moonlight reflected off its surface. The trees and bushes were at our backs when out of nowhere, the bright headlights of a police cruiser came speeding through the adjacent parking lot. The vehicle's frame bounced off the concrete speed bumps as red and blue lights flashed. It came to a screeching stop, and a spotlight was shined into the trees. We both thought, shit, we aren't supposed to be here. What the hell do we do? We may or may not have been under the influence. This was remarkably bad timing. We knew the cops had seen us, so we just stayed put. If we started running, we would risk being chased down and arrested. The cop, however, didn't approach us right away. We looked on for a while and wondered what the hell was going on over there. We thought maybe the officer had caught a drug deal going down. We couldn't make out a whole lot through the trees. Eventually, the cop approached us, and we thought for sure we would get arrested or fined while being in the park while it was closed. What the officer said, though, was truly terrifying. He had been doing his routine patrol when he'd spotted a dark figure in the trees hiding and watching us. He told us that since my boyfriend had such long hair and was a thin guy, the man hiding in the trees had most likely assumed we were both women. My boyfriend's ego was shattered a little. Once the cops saw the stalker was moving slowly towards us and getting ready to ambush us, that's when he decided to turn on his lights and rush in. He ended up catching the man, and what he found on him was alarming. An arsenal of weapons, handcuffs, zip ties, and duct tape, a gun as well. An attacker's field kit, basically. I was overwhelmed by fear. We were lucky that the cop had seen him creeping around in the bushes because it would not have ended well for us. We thanked the officer and proceeded to walk the few blocks back to our apartment in silence. I feel very lucky to be alive today. We never did return to that park again. When our second child, my son, was 4 years old, we decided to move from Yokohama to my husband's hometown in Hoku. I searched online for ages, trying to find a nice place to live. I managed to find somewhere good, so I asked my sister-in-law to view the property on our behalf. It seemed perfect. It was a rental, but essentially a pretty big house. It had hardwood floors, and it was on a quiet little street. The rent was quite cheap, too, compared to our previous area. There were mountains just behind the house, as well as a scenic stream, so I decided that it would be the perfect environment to raise our children. I imagined them growing a rich interest in nature. We were so happy to move, and it turned out to be exactly how we had hoped. My husband and I were in love with this place. When we met the neighbors, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that they had migrated from the same area we had, so we had plenty to talk about. They also had children the same age as ours, so we very quickly became friendly with them. This was most welcome, as it did take some time to get acclimated. I felt like we really didn't fit in with some of the people who lived in the countryside. It could be a bit cliquey. We moved in late summer and things went really well. Nothing much really happened. A few months later, snow began to fall. One day, it started snowing during the day, and by the time we had finished dinner, I looked outside at our garden, and there were 5 centimeters of fresh snow out there. I gave my kids a bath and got them into bed, and headed back downstairs to join my husband in the living room. That was when we first heard it. It was this strange, animalistic growling sound, and it sounded like it was coming from outside, somewhere nearby to where we were sitting in the living room. I could hear the growling sound so clearly that even with the TV on and all the windows shut, it was clear as day. My husband could hear it too. We both looked at one another in silence. We paused the TV to listen a little more clearly. The growl was very deep and powerful. I started to wonder if it was a wild dog or a bear. Those thoughts frightened me. If there was some big animal out there, it could easily try and smash its way into our home if it smelled something it wanted. I went into protection mode and readied myself. I grabbed my phone just in case and held it tightly. We sat there listening to that low growling. It changed as if it started to attack something, and we heard a really loud, high-pitched scream. My husband jumped up to his feet and left the room. He returned with a flashlight in hand, and he said that we should look out from the window upstairs. We crept into my oldest son's bedroom to look out of his window as it faced the direction we heard the growls and screams coming from. My husband shined his flashlight outside. It was as if the growls and screams were in unison, as if one person or creature was making these varied sounds. It was very unnerving. We squinted and looked everywhere, but we couldn't see anything out in the darkness. My eldest son was awake now. He must have heard those bestial sounds and woken up. He was pulling the covers up to just beneath his eyes. He looked scared. We could hear the screams and growls outside rising in volume, so we tried to see if we could find anything out there. Once again, we couldn't see a thing. My husband said he was going out to check it out. I desperately tried to stop him. We ended up having a heated argument. While we were arguing, all those strange and frightening noises coming from outside suddenly stopped altogether. The following morning when I woke up, I went to look out there to see if there were any signs of what had occurred. I don't know what exactly I was expecting to find, maybe some footprints or something, but there wasn't any signs of anyone having been out there, just pure white snow. I spent most of the day thinking about that night. I ended up being so curious about it that I went to ask my neighbors if they had seen or heard anything. They had been living there for 2 years more than we had. I figured that if this had happened before, they might be able to tell me a little more about whatever it was. They said that they had heard the same noises that we had. The first time they did, they thought it might have been a bear, so they called the police. This was at about 11 p.m. roughly, around the same time we'd heard it last night. Police officers came out with some rangers. They came out and searched the area, but didn't find anything. They made a report, but nothing much happened beyond that. They also said that they thought it was very strange that they couldn't find any traces of anyone after all that noise they'd heard. Really played on their minds, just like it played on mine. They said that back then it had been snowing that day too. I first noticed it just after Halloween, just at the cusp of winter. This was last year, of course, and it was the strangest thing. It really creeped me out. At around 2:30 in the morning, I heard someone trying to open the door. It was coming from our front door, and it was not gentle at all. It was jarring enough to wake me and my partner up. It was quite scary to hear a noise like that in the middle of the night, but we both tried to be calm and rational. I remember sitting up in bed in the dark and asking my partner if it was the wind or something. It was quite weird, as the noise went away immediately as we got up. We kind of stopped caring about it. We thought it must have been a drunk neighbor trying the wrong house or something. A couple of weeks went by, and we were about midway through November now. I began to hear someone trying to open the door again, only this time I was already awake. I was watching something on my phone in the bathroom. I pressed pause and took out my headphones. I checked the time and saw it was around 2:30 a.m., just like last time. I went straight to the door, and I got this really weird feeling as I approached it. I planned on throwing the door open and giving whoever was behind it a piece of my mind, but something inside me screamed that was a bad idea. Don't do that. I did, however, summon the courage to look out through the peephole. I expected to see some pranking kid or something, or the drunk neighbor like mentioned before, but no one was out there. There was no one at all, just the snow falling. The wind was blowing through the gaps in my door, making that noise you can always hear when it's cold and windy out, almost like an ominous moaning sound. I really didn't like it. I'd never liked that sound, really. I backed away from the door. Enough was enough. At that point, I spoke about it with my husband, and we made a plan to stay up late to see if we could catch whoever was messing with us. We wanted to catch them in the act, as they always seemed to flee as soon as we noticed them. This was happening way too frequently to be some kind of coincidence or mistake either. He really didn't want to do it, to be honest, as he had to work early in the morning, but this was quite important to me. We sat on the stairs glaring at the front door from about 2:20 onwards. About 10 minutes later, the inevitable happened. Someone began trying to open our door again. My husband raced to the door and put his eye to the peephole. He turned back my way, though, and whispered that he didn't see anyone out there. My husband did say he could feel a presence, though, similar to the feelings I had felt when I went to the door, only he phrased it a little differently. He just said he felt a bad feeling, as if something was trying to enter the home. That really stayed with me, I guess because of the way he phrased it. He then said that if we heard the noise again, that it might be best to just try and ignore it. We both decided to leave things alone. I mean, each time we tried to check, there appeared to be no one there, so we thought there wasn't much to worry about. Weeks went by and the doorknob continued to rattle, but my husband and I didn't care about it that much. We had bigger things to worry about. I started to feel bad towards the end of November. I started to feel really unwell and continued to feel that way when the new year rolled around, right up until early February. I went to the doctor for an examination, and during the pelvic exam, they conducted some tests and found out I had cancer. 2 days after the appointment, I was transferred to the hospital in the city. Tests and surgery came next, and thankfully they were very successful. I was in the hospital for about a month, maybe a month and a half. After that, I was able to go home. I'd been so preoccupied and frankly scared when I was in the hospital that I forgot all about that rattling door stuff going on at home. When I got home, I asked my husband if he had heard anything while I was in the hospital. He was honest and said he had completely forgotten about that stuff too. He was in the hospital most nights and days with me. I don't know why I thought he would have an update for me on the door stuff. He did say that he was up most nights after leaving me in the ward, as he found it quite hard to sleep. On average, he was up until 3 a.m., and during that time no one tried the door. At least that was good. One quiet evening, while we were clearing our plates after dinner, he said something that will always stay with me. You know, this sounds silly, but I think whoever was trying to open the door might have been the Grim Reaper or something. This was very jarring, because my husband wasn't the type to get scared easily or even be superstitious. Naturally, his comment took me aback. I don't want you to open the door if we ever hear anything like that again. That thought has never left me. I also consider myself incredibly lucky to be here. I mean, ghost stories and home intruder stories are really scary, but what I experienced was a level higher than that. What might have happened if I had decided to open that door? Would I still be here? I get the sense that things may have played out differently. My husband believes that it was a sign of warning of my cancer, and that if we hadn't opened the door and let whatever was outside in, I may have never made it out of the hospital. I hate going out. I'm thankful I'm married now, and my husband hates going out just as much as me. I never really enjoyed it at all. I know a lot of people, especially as they get older, slow down, and that's mainly because they get it out of their system when they're young. My friends started going out every weekend back in high school, and I was always the one kind of looking for ways to get out of it. One weekend during my senior year of high school, I was talked into going out to this house party at my friend Wanda's house. I tried every excuse in the book, but she was begging me to go. Eventually, I caved in. I remember being so anxious leading up to the party. Everyone from school was going apparently. All week long, all I remember is people talking about this rager of a party going down at Wanda's. I got there early so I could find a nice corner of the house to post up in. It took a little while, but I finally started to unwind as the party went on. I was drinking a little bit, and I'm sure that was part of the equation of me loosening up. The party started around 7 that night, and by the time midnight rolled around, people were already starting to leave. I remember thinking to myself, maybe going out isn't so bad every once in a while. I didn't want to drive home yet, though, at least not right away. I had been drinking after all. I stayed with Wanda and helped her clean the place up a bit. She lived alone with just her dad, and didn't want him to come home from his business trip to a destroyed house. There were 5 of us left at around 1 in the morning. The house was almost spotless by now. We'd really divided and conquered the different rooms with our cleaning. The other 3 girls were going to stay overnight. I was going to leave, though, since I wasn't really feeling the alcohol anymore at this point. I went into the bathroom to wash my face and take care of business before the drive home. I wanted to make sure I was okay enough to drive my vehicle. While I was in the bathroom, though, I heard a loud crash, followed by gasps and screams from my friends. I heard Wanda yelling something like, "You can't be here anymore!" That was instantly responded to by an aggressive woman's voice, screaming at everyone to shut up. I didn't know what to do. I could hear them crying and screaming and panicking coming from my friends. I felt like a coward, but I locked myself in the bathroom. I heard Wanda yell to my friends who were out in the room to get out of there. I heard loud bangs occurring, and I just sort of sat in the fetal position on the bathroom floor. I wished I could call someone for help, but I'd left my cell phone in my bag in the kitchen. I heard that aggressive voice again. "You're not leaving." I could hear shoving, screaming. It was like witnessing a nightmare, but not being able to see what was actually happening. I couldn't imagine what my friends were going through on the other side of that door, and I just sat there in the bathroom like a coward. The crying and screaming continued. There were more loud bangs, the sound of glass shattering. It was enough for me to be paralyzed in fear. Many moments passed by before I heard Wanda say, "Okay, go now." I heard a series of footsteps running by the door. I was too scared to act, though. I could hear the aggressive woman running by after, assumedly chasing my friends. She screamed at them to get back there. She began to do this unsettling, psychotic howling. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard in my entire life. I had no idea what was going on, and no way to get any information. Just when I thought the nightmare couldn't get any worse, the woman approached the bathroom door. She tried opening it, but realized someone was inside. She began pounding on the door, screaming and asking who was in the bathroom. I started crying and remained on the bathroom floor. The woman was relentlessly attacking the door. I was convinced it was going to break open at any second. This went on for agonizing minutes. I just hoped it would end soon. Then, I'm not even joking, the woman started to run back and forth outside the bathroom door. I don't know if she was on something or just some crazy, insane woman with the zoomies, but her footsteps were fast and heavy. It sounded like a bear stomping around outside the bathroom. I had no idea what was happening. Clearly, whoever this woman was thought this house belonged to her, and she knew Wanda by name. I was trying to put the pieces together in my mind. Due to the frantic nature of what was currently occurring outside my hiding space, though, I was a little bit distracted, to say the least. It wasn't long after my friends ran away that I heard a sound I found very comforting, the sound of the police entering the home. They apprehended the woman. I could hear her screaming and the sounds of a fight occurring on the other side. Eventually, one of the officers knocked on the bathroom door and asked if I was okay. It took me a second to answer, but I was finally able to make the words come out of my mouth. I unlocked the door and slowly came out to see what was on the other side. It was like seeing the nightmare come to reality. Their beautiful home had been destroyed. There was broken glass and objects everywhere. In the kitchen, I saw the woman handcuffed, standing with 2 officers. She looked over at me, and I'll never forget the look in her eyes. She had the most deranged eyes I'd ever seen. They were so big they were nearly bulging out of her sockets. She was breathing heavily, and when she noticed me leaving the bathroom, she started to scream at me that I was trespassing in her home. One of the officers started to escort me out of the house, and then I looked down at the lady's hands. They were all red, stained with what I assumed to be blood. I looked back and noticed the outside of the bathroom door was covered with bloody handprints all up and down, and blood was trickling onto the floor. This woman had destroyed her own body trying to get inside at me. It was traumatizing. When I got outside, I saw Wanda and all my friends. I'd never been so happy in my entire life. I remember being lost, locked in the bathroom, thinking that maybe they had abandoned me. In fact, they'd actually gone and got help to save me because they knew I was still inside. When I finally got my phone back, I had dozens of texts and missed calls from Wanda, telling me to stay locked in the bathroom and not leave no matter what. She thought I had my phone on me, even though I did not. It turned out the crazy woman was Wanda's ex-stepmother, I guess if that's a thing. When she was married to her dad, she ended up going nuts and trying to kill her father, which was ultimately what led to them separating. She never quite accepted it clearly. We never found out what happened to her after that night. We realized quickly that Wanda didn't exactly want to talk about it, and we never pushed it either. Didn't seem like the right thing to do. Eventually, everyone sort of moved on. I have my reasons as to why I don't like going out much, and this right here was one at the top of the list. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to drive across country. Not for any special reason, really. More for the thrill of the adventure. We had done beach trips, cruises, skydiving, you name it. The one thing we never did was drive all the way across country. I can't remember exactly what state we were in, but it was somewhere in the Midwest, I believe. We found this cute little diner and decided to grab some food. That was the one thing we wanted to do at each place we stopped at, find a diner and eat there. We were sitting in a small booth in the back of the restaurant, and a middle-aged woman approached me. She was short and had an average build. Her hair was red and somewhat curly. What I remember most about her physical appearance was she had very vibrant green eyes. I had never seen such green eyes before. They were objectively very pretty. She kinda pulled a curveball on me when she looked right in my eyes and told me I had the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen. I just smiled and laughed a little. I thanked her and went back to drinking my coffee. This woman then sat down next to my girlfriend and continued to tell me how beautiful my eyes were. At first it was nice, but now it started creeping into unsettling territory. I could tell my girlfriend was not having any of this at all. She went into a full 10-minute rant, raving about how beautiful my eyes were and how she wished she could have them, before she finally got up and went back to her table, where she had been sitting alone. I started to bust my girlfriend's chops. She seemed a little jealous, which I found funny because she's not usually the jealous type at all. I did notice that the woman was continuously staring at me, but I pretended I hadn't seen anything. I didn't want to worry my girlfriend or make her feel bad. I'm not going to lie, this was starting to feel a little bit obsessive. I was about ready to hit the road, and so was my girlfriend. We left and headed out. Every few hours, I would ask my girlfriend what she thought about my eyes just to tease her. She wasn't as amused as I was, unfortunately. While we were driving, she kept telling me she had a really bad feeling about that woman. She claimed that something was not quite right with her. It was like she was dangerous, or at least had the capabilities to be dangerous. I didn't necessarily feel that, even though she had been a little bit wacky. Eventually, we simply stopped talking about her and continued on our trip. No more talk about eyes at all. During the night sometime, we decided to pull over at some sort of desolate mountain road. I pointed at the sky, and we couldn't believe our eyes. The view of the stars looked like we were standing right there in space. It was beautiful. I took the truck off-road a little bit and decided to open the back so we could lay there for a while and stare at the night sky together. It was lovely, and for a moment it was one of the best moments of my entire life. That was until it became one of the most scary and startling moments I'd ever experienced. About 20 minutes after climbing into the back of the truck, we started to hear something weird. I was sure it was a coyote or some other type of animal that dwelt in the area, but it soon became clear that this noise was a voice, not an animal. I grabbed my softball bat, which was in the back of the truck, and jumped out from the back. Standing right there on the side of my truck was the woman from the diner. She was just looking at me, with her hands hidden behind her back. She wasn't smiling or frowning. She had a blank expression. She was clearly mumbling something, but I couldn't make out exactly what she was saying. I told my girlfriend to get in the front seat and grab my keys, which she quickly did. The woman refused to break eye contact with me. I slowly backed up to the driver's side door, and once I was next to it, I basically jumped inside the truck. I slammed the keys in the ignition and sped away. I didn't get very far, though. The woman dove out in front of my truck, and I had to slam on the brakes to not run her over. I could hear the woman crying and screaming on the outside. I was ignoring it to the best of my ability. After that dive, I tried to swerve around her and sped off, leaving a huge cloud of dust in my retreat. Maybe a mile or so down the road, I saw a car parked off the side. We both knew it had to be hers. The pit in our stomachs grew even bigger. We must have made enough distance between us and her, though, because thankfully we never saw her again. While we were driving away, we started to reflect on that moment and realized just how scary and horrifying that could have been. We'd driven for hours after we left that diner, and the woman had followed us the entire way without us ever noticing. She even crossed state lines to do so. What she intended to do to us is unknown, and I'm happy it's going to stay that way. If we didn't notice her creeping up the side of our truck when we did, who knows what she would have done to us. Enough time has passed now that when we tell this story, my friends like to joke that this woman was the monster from Jeepers Creepers because she said she wanted my eyes. It's a ridiculous little chapter of my life, and one I'm happy to have escaped from with no real harm done.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell so you never miss a story. And if you have your own encounter you'd like to share, leave a comment below. Who knows, it might just find its way into a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the scariest stories are often the ones closest to home.